Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Recently a lot of people have been talking about the new bot on chess.com Mittens, but there's also a lot of other bots. For example, there's the Hikaru bot, there is also the Magnus Carlsen bot, and in this video I made them play against each other. So what I did is I opened up the PlayMagnus app, I made the moves on chess.com against Hikaru bot, see how Magnus would react, and that way made them play a game. Now in this game, Hikaru started off with the white piece. I also have a game where Magnus plays with white, so let's see what is going to happen. And if you're watching right now, maybe you can already, sort of think for yourself, who do you think is going to win? Do you think it's going to be Magnus or Hikaru? Well, let's have a look. So in this game, Hikaru started the game off with the move 1b3, a move he plays quite often on chess.com, and Magnus responded with the move g6. But one quick thing that I will say before we get into the games is that the games actually did reflect in a way how the players play. Hikaru played the move bishop e2, knight f6 by Magnus, knight f3, bishop g7 by Magnus, and Hikaru played the move e3. Again, this is an opening that Hikaru plays quite regularly, and Magnus played a very accurate move, pawn to c5. Hikaru played the move d4, and the reason c5 is so accurate in this position is because in this position, black should not castle. If black castles, Hikaru has actually very often tricked his opponents by the move d takes c5, and if check c3 takes and bishop a3 here wins a pawn, because you take the queen and the pawn on e7. So c5 in this position is very accurate, d4, and now Magnus decides to take on d4, and Hikaru recaptures with the knight. This is how he plays quite often. Magnus plays the move b6, he wants to fianchetto his other bishop as well. Hikaru goes bishop b2, castles, and knight c6. And here, to be honest, I thought that this game was going to be pretty dry. I expected at some point that Hikaru was going to take, maybe like bishop f3. And the structure is fairly symmetrical, but Hikaru played bishop f3 first, bishop b7, maybe now take, and again, the game will get pretty dry. But he decided to play the move c4, grabbing space in the center with knight c to follow. If Magnus wanted to play it very solid here, he could have played a move like d5, going for simplifications. But he played queen to c7, keeping pieces on the board, knight c3, and now a6. Hikaru goes rook to c1, and Magnus plays knight e5. They traded the bishops, and here I think Hikaru played an accurate move. I think he should have played something like queen e2, with rook fd1 to follow. It's also what I think he should have played in a real game. But the move he played was the move f4, and this really weakens his position. I think it's not a move he would have played in a real game, so sorry to him. But Magnus played knight c6, knight f3, another inaccuracy by Hikaru, and b5 by Magnus. A great move. Generally, if black gets in this move, he's in pretty good shape. That's why white very often ends up putting the queen in e2 to restrain all sorts of breaks. Whatever happens in the pawn structure here is really in black's favor. In case white trades, we take. Black gets the open a file, there's no longer a bind on the d5 square, and b4 will always be annoying, and white will have to put his knight on the edge of the board. So Hikaru played queen e2, now Magnus took, and here white again has to face an awkward decision. If he takes with the queen, well then black's in pretty good shape after, let's say, rook f to c8. And again, I don't like this move f4 at all, because his pawn on e3 will always be a target. Like if black goes here or here, maybe like knight g4. So Hikaru decided to recapture with a pawn, and here Magnus played queen b4. And Magnus' technique, like his bot's technique, is so good in this game. Rook to b1, queen a5, knight d2, a good move by Hikaru, and rook fb8. Again, Magnus is playing with real accuracy here. Knight to b3, and queen to h5, offering the queen trade, because we know how strong Magnus is in the endgame. Hikaru decided to trade, rook fd1, and rook a7. A very neat way to defend this pawn on d7, and to keep all of the other pieces active. Hikaru played g4, knight f6, and h3. Magnus decides to double up his rooks on the b file. And Hikaru goes g5. Now, I'm not quite sure about this move. It kicks the knight away, but I think this only helps black. The knight can jump back to d6, attack this pawn over here. Hikaru played knight e4, takes stakes, and Magnus plays d6. The idea behind the move d6 is to make sure that white does not have a knight jump to c5. And also, black wants to go a move like rook b4, attack this, and make sure that the pawn on d7 is not hanging. So Hikaru played c5, attacking the pawn on d6, and now Magnus plays rook b4. An excellent move, because just trading on c5 doesn't really lead to anything. White's completely fine here. But after rook b4, how do you deal with this attack on the knight on e4? You can't quite take on d6, because black just takes here and wins a piece after d7. This doesn't really work out. So Hikaru just moves the knight back to d2. And his idea is that, okay, if Magnus takes on c5, now he wants to go rook c2. He's temporarily down a pawn, but he'll get the pawn on c5 back in no time. But Magnus, again, plays a very good move. He plays the move rook a4. So he's keeping the tension, and he's also opening up the b4 square for his knight, potentially. So Hikaru takes, Magnus recaptures. Again, this knight comes back into the game. Rook db1, and now Magnus plays another fantastic move. He plays rook b5. And with this move, again, he's making sure that there's no knight c5 jumps, and he wants to go for pawn to e5 to soften up white's pawn structure on the king side. Right, the pawn on f4 will come under attack with this rook, and if you ever take, well, then the pawn on g5 will get pretty weak because black's rook on b5. So rook to c1 was played by Hikaru, and now knight b4, and Magnus starts creating problems in the white position. But Hikaru, to his credit, defends very well. He goes knight d4, attacking the rook, rook b7, and now he sacrifices a pawn, which very often is the sign of a class player, right? When you're in a passive position, sometimes you want to get out of it by sacrificing a little bit of material instead of getting squeezed slowly but surely. So Magnus takes it, knight c4, good move by Hikaru, forcing the trade, and now this knight on b4 is tough to defend. So Magnus plays a5, Hikaru goes knight to c2. Now, Hikaru's idea is to trade off everything here on b4. Let's say Magnus goes here, and enter into a 4 versus 3 endgame, which he should be able to hold. It's going to be very difficult here for Magnus to make progress. I don't think there's really a way. You're always going to put your pawn on h4, and black's majority on the queen side is completely immobilized. Alright, so Magnus played rook to a4, defending the pawn. Now here there's no good way for Hikaru to deal with the tension, because let's say you take, black takes, and the trades are always in black's favor because he will get his rook behind the passed pawn. That's really the best place where you want to have your rook. So Hikaru gave a check, king up, king of 1, and now Magnus plays another fantastic move. He goes e5. He wants to soften up the pawn structure to give white a bunch of weaknesses. Like if he takes here, well, the pawn on f4 will get very weak. And if Hikaru takes himself, well, then the pawn on e5 is weak, and later on the pawn on g5 or the pawn on e3. Now Hikaru decides to take, and we get into this endgame where we have a 3 versus 2 majority for black on the king side. Now let's say this pawn had been on g2. This would have been a pretty easy draw. Let's say the pawn would have been on f2. Same thing, but the pawns are so far split that both of them are kind of weak, and black has multiple ways of creating a passed pawn down the line. Again, like, this is a typical Magnus game. He gets a slight advantage, gets to an endgame, and tries to squeeze out his opponent. Okay, Hikaru goes king of 2, h6, but again, to his credit, Hikaru defends very well. h4, good move, rook a5, king g3. Magnus is slowly moving around, but there's not much he can do. But he is playing pretty well, but in this position, he makes a pretty odd decision. I do not understand king c6 at all, because all of the action is going on the king side, so why would you move your king away? He should have just kept this king here. Now Hikaru would have probably kept checking and, tucking the king again to g7. Again, it's not 100% clear how he's going to win this, but I feel like an idea down the line could be, let's say, h5, f6, and g5. Because if black gets 2 connected passers on h5 and g5 against just 1 passer on e3, that should be winning. So I think that would have been the plan. But Magnus instead goes with his king here. King e4 by Hikaru. He wants to go for active counterplay with king e5. So Magnus goes rook a5. And again, they're shuffling back and forth. Maybe what Magnus should have done is at some point rook d5 so he can bring his king back. f1. They're just shuffling back and forth. Rook f4, f6. And here, it feels like black's pawns are a little bit too loose. Also, this king is far away. So it's going to be difficult for black to defend the pawns. So king d5, king f4, king e6. Check, back. Again, Magnus is trying, but it feels like Hikaru should be able to save the draw here. If black goes here, there's always h5, followed by a rook a7. And again, the pawns are always weak, so it should be a draw. So rook d3 by Magnus. He's, again, always posing problems. Check. Now, here Magnus played king to g6, and Hikaru gave a checkmate. I'm kidding, that's not what happened. Of course not. Because these are bots. King e6, rook a8. Now, and here Magnus took the pawn e3. And blundered the rook. And Hikaru won the game. Well, I hope you all enjoyed. No, I'm kidding. That's not what happened. Magnus played rook to b3, king h5, and rook b1. And again, he's posing these small problems. Hikaru could have taken on h6, but it gets a little tricky. Magnus gets his passed h-pawn, and maybe down the line there will be some sort of endgame where black gets the e-pawn as well. But usually this should be a draw, but white's king is pretty far away, so it's always a little bit tricky. Anyway, Hikaru took on g5, takes, played king g6, rook f1, rook e8, king here, rook e4, rook f3. But here, rook c4 is still fine, king e6, check, king d5. But here, the bot made an inexplicable mistake. It should have just gone to e8, but again, like, Magnus is posing those small practical problems that, even for a bot, it was too much. But it was absolutely important that Hikaru would have made sure that the king cannot cross the e-file and start taking the white pawns. Because even though this king is active, it's also pretty far away if this pawn starts pushing itself. And actually, the lines get pretty tricky here. It's still a draw, but by an absolute computer line. Black can play the move g4 here, start pushing the pawn. But white still holds with king h5, g3, king h4, and black goes g2. Now you might think, like, okay, we just go rook g8, hit the pawn. If black takes, again, this is a draw because with an f-pawn and the king on the long side, what you always do is you want to put your rook over here so you can always give checks from this side of the board. But the critical continuation here is the move rook f2, just defending the pawn, and black's going to bring his king up. Like, what are you going to do? If you go rook g4, black just goes f5, kicks your rook away, king e4, king e3, it's game over. So what white has to do is go king h3, king e4. Again, it feels like we're just losing a second pawn, because if you go rook g3, black trades off the rooks and goes into a winning king and pawn game. But white can go king h2, and if takes, black is up 2 pawns, which is normally winning, but white just goes king g1. And black is lacking coordination for the moment. Like, the king and the rook are kind of stuck. In case you move the rook over, white goes rook f8. And you don't have a good way of defending this pawn over here. Had this pawn been on f5, black goes f4, and it's game over. But here, there's no good way. If you go rook a6, well, you hang this. So white's just in time to save the draw. And if black plays a move like king f3 to prepare the move rook f1, white saves the draw with the move rook g3 check. And if you take it, stalemate. And if you go to e2, well, here again, white goes for rook a3, and he has enough activity to make the draw. So it's quite insane that for whatever reason, white is able to save the draw in this position, even though he's down 2 pawns. But again, black's lacking coordination for just one moment to get everything together. If he goes f5, well then, again, white gives a check. And if king e2, there's rook a3, and white's just in time. So white had a way to save the draw, but it was pretty difficult. But instead of that, the Hikaru bot goes wrong with the move rook to b4. But now Magnus just goes king e5. And again, this king is completely off. Black is simply taking another pawn. He's going to put his g-pawn in motion, and there's nothing white can do. Hikaru played here. Magnus took the pawn. Hikaru is going to get, like, here he could have taken the pawn on f6. But again, the king is completely misplaced, and Magnus is going to win the pawn with this g-pawn that's moving down the board. So Hikaru gave a check. Rook here, rook a6, and Magnus just decides to give up this pawn on f6 because his g-pawn is going to win the game. Check, rook e3, rook f1, and g3. And there's nothing that Hikaru can do to stop this pawn. King f5, rook d4. Magnus, of course, played it accurately till the very end. He puts his rook, again, behind the passed pawn. That's where it belongs. Check here. Again, Hikaru had to give up his rook. And Magnus played this very accurately till the end. Like, actually, when I'm looking at this game, usually when you have, like, a rook for rook and king versus a rook, you don't play the most accurate moves, right? Like, it might be made in 12, but you make an accurate move and it's made in 13 or whatever. But the bot played the very best moves till the end. King c6, king c7, and it's checkmate. After 93 moves, Magnus Carlsen takes the lead in this very prestigious bot battle match. And so let's see if Hikaru can come back. In the next game, Hikaru was playing with the black piece and Magnus with white. And Magnus opens up the game with the move 1c4. Hikaru responds with e5. This is generally Hikaru's main response against the English opening. Magnus goes knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight f6, and e4. I don't know if Magnus has played this opening a whole lot with the white pieces. I remember him playing it from the black side at the World Rapid Championship against the later champion Noederbeck at the Satorov. This game really, determined the whole tournament because Magnus had been in good shape, but he lost his game and Noederbeck took over the lead and went on to win the event. But Hikaru plays bishop b4. An important trick to keep in mind is that black cannot play bishop c5, or he can, but it's a little bit dubious. Bishop c5 looks ideal, right? Because you want to play on this weak d4 square, but here white has to move knight takes e5. And if takes d4 with a fork, getting the sacrifice piece back. Now, if black decides to be clever here with the move bishop d6, it's actually a real disaster right away after move c5 because the bishop has to move again. And now you're knight has to move back. So the best move here for black is to move bishop b4, and here Hans Niemann won a very nice game against Shakir Mamacharov in the Sinkfield Cup. Before shit hit the fan, like, for lack of a better word. Anyway, bishop b4 is the main move. Attacking the knight, d3, short castles, bishop b2, d6, short castles, and Hikaru played h6, making sure that there's no bishop to g5. And Magnus goes a3, and here Hikaru has to make a decision. Does he take on c3 right away, or does he move the bishop back? Well, either way, white's gonna get the bishop pair with knight a4, or go for a move like bishop e3, force this trade. I believe we saw something like this in the tiebreaker of the World Rapid Championship in 2021 between Neuderberg, Abdusatorov, and Jan Nepomniachtchi, where white gets a lot of space in the center. Neuderberg won a great game. So Hikaru decides to trade on c3 right away, and we get this imbalance, where white has the two bishops, he also has more space, but black has the slightly better pawn structure. Now, to be fair though, the pawns on c4 and c3 are not bad, because they're controlling a lot of squares, right? The pawn on c3 controls the d4 square, and the pawn on c4 controls the d5 break for black. So I think what Hikaru should have done in this position, sooner or later, is play something like knight h7 and go for f5 to create active play himself. But he played bishop d7, bishop e3, knight g4, bishop d2, and here I was really surprised that he did not play the move f5. Again, creating the pawn break, and black is an excellent game. But he played the move knight f6 back, and from here on out, Magnus starts playing very, very well. He goes rook b1, hitting the pawn, b6, and now knight e1. Magnus wants to move his knight so he can go for the f4 break and re-maneuver his knight back to the center. Knight a5, f4, rook a by Hikaru, knight c2, another excellent move. Knight wants to go to e3, bishop a4 by Hikaru, creating this annoying pin. Magnus goes rook b4, queen e7, and queen to b1. He is moving his queen out of this pin so that then again his knight can move. I was honestly expecting something like takes and takes here, but it's not that good. Actually, black should take here first, and then take, because even though this looks scary, black is doing pretty fine after king h7 and rook to g8. So what Magnus did is absolutely correct. Queen b1 is the best move. Takes, c5, but now the rook moves back, and this pawn d6 is a little bit weak. Also, knight e3 is an idea, but Hikaru had an idea. His idea was to go d5 and make use of the fact that this bishop on e2 is undefended. So Magnus took it, Hikaru recaptured, takes, and on first glance, it looks like black's doing pretty okay. Like, the rook is pretty active, white has these double pawns, but after the move knight e3, black has to make a very tough decision. You can give up the exchange, but it doesn't feel quite correct. Like, you can also trade the rooks here. And again, it looks like black is fine, but the problem for black is that this knight is kind of on the edge of the board, or it is. The bishop as well, and white is simply going to launch an attack against this king, because, hey, who is defending that king over there? White just wants to go like queen f2, queen g3, maybe sack, like knight f5. It's very difficult for black to defend, which is why this position is already lost. It's plus 2.8. So because of that, Hikaru decided to give up his rook for the knight, but it doesn't feel like black has enough compensation. Magnus played rook f3, another excellent move. He wants to go rook g3, maybe bring the rook over, queen e1, rook e by Hikaru, queen f8. Magnus again pushing all his pieces to the king side to launch an attack against his black king. Bishop d7, rook g3, and here Hikaru made another inaccuracy. He played the move g5, which is severely weakening the black king. I don't think this is a move Hikaru would have played in a normal game. I would expect him to play a move like king h7, you know, keeping everything together. So g5, rook f2, c4, Magnus just goes d4, not allowing any counterplay, and it feels like sooner or later the black king side is going to collapse. Like rook f6 is an idea, maybe h4 to soften everything up. Hikaru goes f5, but this just allows the shot. Bishop takes g5, and the problem for black is he cannot take, because if you take, there comes a check. If you go to the f-file, white can always do this, and he's winning the queen, and a rook and a knight is clearly not enough. And if you step to the h-file, well, then there will always be someone like rook f3, and black's just getting checkmated. So Hikaru played king f7, but this is already a clear sign that things have gone wrong. Magnus took, because here he's up in exchange, and he has a big attack. Bishop b6, check. He took another pawn, knight c6, rook b7, knight takes d4. A little trick, but it doesn't work because this rook is under attack. But you can trade here first and give a check before you take the knight. King f7, Magnus took. And now he's just up a full rook, so there isn't too much hope for the Hikaru bot here. Magnus took the pawn, gave a check, went queen here to go for an attack. And yeah, he had no problem solving, finishing up the game. H3, making sure that there's no backrank checkmates. Hikaru offered a queen trade, and rook b6. White is starting to close down the mating net around the black king. F3, bishop f4 again. Magnus is playing accurately till the very end. Rook h6 is unstoppable sooner or later. He takes a pawn, and here a little triangulation. Because after king g3, it's Zugzwang. Black has to move this bishop, and there came a checkmate. So Magnus bot wins 2-0 against Hikaru bot. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the games. I thought these games were pretty interesting. To be honest, I did feel like the Hikaru bot did play below his level. In this game specifically, I felt like he would play f5 always in a normal game. And in the other game, I think he would not play the move f4, which was right around here, which severely weakened his position. But it was great seeing these two bots battle off against each other. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.